Hello and welcome. I'm Bart Poulson, and this is the Data is for Doing office hour, which is now a once a month event. And I'm so glad that you could be here. I am in Salt Lake City, Utah. It's winter, it's the morning, it's a beautiful day, and I'm excited to talk with you today. Also, for those of you who will be watching this on recording, which will be available later today, welcome. And you are always welcome to put in the comments where you're from and what you're doing. And in fact, for those of you who are watching live right now, I would love it if you would go to the comments section and say hello. Tell me your name and tell me where you're coming in from. One of the amazing things I learned recently is that in the handful of events that I've done these office hours, I've had people tuning in from 83 different countries, which is just extraordinary. So I know people are out there and I would love to hear from you. So if you're there, please say hello. In the meantime, I am going to talk to you a little bit about what my purpose is today. And so, for instance, let me see if this is working properly. Okay. If you're out there, please say hello. My goal today, this session is about generative AI, data work, and relationships. Now, Gen AI, or thinking about Chat GPT and things like that. This is a major topic, but I'm talking about something that is not the technical aspect of it. By the way, we've got Matthew from Gloucester, UK. Good morning, and Francie Luz from Boston, and Ronald from New York City, and Ashta from India. Thank you so much for joining me. It really is wonderful. I know this is morning for some of you, late afternoon for others, and so I appreciate the devotion. Sakshi in New Jersey and Patrick in Virginia. This is great. Oh my goodness, Simon from Nigeria and Hadi from Iran. This is fabulous. Thank you so much for coming. So, and we have Dennis from Ghana, and some of you, I recognize you from before, so it's nice to have you coming back. Lazaro from Mexico, Hab from Ethiopia, Success in Manchester, Sema in Turkey. This is extraordinary. This is very gratifying. It's wonderful to have this community here. And Zhao from also in the UK, and then Bin in Canada. You're a big international group. I am honored to be here. And also Richard from Ghana. Well, folks, let me tell you what I'm talking about, Gen AI. Now, I'm not here to tell you how to use ChatGPT to do your work. I assume you've tried something like that before, or other systems, Meta's Llama, or Google Bard, or some other system. That's fine, but I'll mention too, I'm a big fan of these. I have a paid account to ChatGPT, and I use it every now and then, and I find it tremendously useful. But there are issues that people may not automatically consider when they're dealing with these systems. Now, some of the issues are really well known. So, for instance, there is the matter of intellectual property. A lot of writers, a lot of artists are suing various companies because they are showing that their work was somehow incorporated in the training data of these various systems when their work was copyrighted. And so they are arguing it's a violation of intellectual property. This is an undecided issue. I know that at least in the United States, there have been some court cases that maybe there's protection, but there seem to be more that suggest to a certain extent, if it's online, it's fair game because the AI is not reproducing the work in its entirety, but it's sort of, well, it's learning from it. And I know that other countries have said it, well, anyhow, my point here is that's an open question. It has not been fully resolved, and it probably won't be for another, I don't know, a couple of years. But there are concerns about intellectual property. Separate from that, there's concern about data privacy. So for instance, I work with a number of organizations, and they all say, please do not put any of our data into ChatGPT, because it is possible that the data then becomes this private or proprietary data becomes part of the training data and could get released in some way that you didn't intend it to. It's also why they tell you to be careful about putting medical information or private, personal data in there, because you don't really know quite yet what's going to happen with it. And again, I know that they're trying to deal with this in different ways, but again, it's an unresolved issue. So we have the intellectual property issue, which is huge and is not resolved. We have the privacy issue for both personal individual data and for an organization's proprietary data. Again, not resolved. And those are some of the big ones that come up for people. But I wanted to talk about something a little bit different. You may know that by training, I am a social psychologist. I have 4 degrees in psychology, and my PhD is in social psychology. It's a research field. And my main work there was about conflict in cognitive models of relationships. Now, this is based on work by an anthropologist named Alan Page Fisk, who developed what he called relational models theory. And I want to run through that very quickly because it informs a lot of what I want to talk about today. Based on this gargantuan amount of evidence, Fisk concluded that relationships between people can fall into one of 4 very basic categories. The terms that he used for them were, first, communal sharing, which is simply whether a person is in a relationship, in a category, or whether they're not. So like a member of your family. And think about it. A member of your immediate family can walk in the front door without knocking, or they can eat food in the refrigerator without asking, because they are in the group. The second category is authority ranking, which has to do with ordinal relationships. And so, for instance, one person is older than another, or one person is senior to another, or one person has precedence for some reason or another. The third model he called equality matching, which has to do with striking balances. We get the same amount. So I know, for instance, parents like to say they love all their kids the same. It's the same all the way across. And companies like to say we value all of our employees just the same. It's aspirational. And the fourth category in Fisk's relational models theory is market pricing, which has to do with proportionality. And so you think about it, if you work by the hour, you work more hours, you get paid more money. Or a person could get more credit for a project based on how much they contributed to it. Now, one interesting thing about these relational models is they correspond, maybe you notice this, to levels of measurement in statistics. Communal sharing is nominal. You are either in or out of the group. It's a 0-1, true, false. Authority ranking is ordinal. It is more or less, and it indicates order in a data set. Equality matching is interval, which specifies the degree of the difference between 2 categories without necessarily saying what the 0 is. And market pricing, which uses proportions and ratios, is a ratio level of measurement as applied to really relationships. Now, I know this all sounds a little bit bizarre, but there's a reason these things matter, and there's a reason why I'm talking about them in the context of generative AI and data work. And that is each of these models brings cognitive structures along with it that says that certain things make sense, are interpretable, are acceptable, and certain operations don't make sense, are either nonsensical or even offensive. I mean, think about it for a minute. I've got a bicycle. If I wanted to sell my bicycle, I could figure out how much it costs and I could try to sell it and I would get some money for it. And, that's a standard purchase. That's totally fine. Um, I have 3 kids. I'm not going to sell any of my kids. I'm not going to put a dollar value on them. I have never actually tried to calculate how much money I've spent on each of them. It's that is something that is seen as either you can't put a dollar value on a human life. I mean, insurance companies can put a dollar value on how much they need to pay you if you lose an arm or an eye, but in normal circumstances, you can't put a dollar value on something. On my bicycle, I can totally put a dollar value on it. Now, there are interesting exceptions to this. For instance, you can have an item that has sentimental value. I have some things that are not worth very much to other people, but they're very important to me and they're not replaceable. And so those, it's no longer a market pricing. It is switched over into, say, for instance, this communal sharing, where it becomes an indicator of identity and my personality. Here's where AI works into these things. First off, generative AI. Well, okay. First off, there's a general problem with any data approach, and that is people tend to see data as objective, and therefore any argument that involves data is free from subjectivity and is not something to be argued with. Well, I mean, yes, to a certain extent, data is objective. You calculate the mean, it doesn't matter, you know, where you live or how tall you are, you calculate the mean the same way. Now, you may have to make decisions about whether you include outliers, what to do with missing data, and so on. But, if I give you numbers from 1 to 10 and ask you to calculate the mean, we would all get the same answer. That procedure in and of itself is objective. Again, there are decisions about things like missing data and outliers that affect it. And so you want to be clear about those. But if you explain your procedure, other people should know what you're doing. On the other hand, there are a lot of times that people use data and they use it in a way where it serves them more as a bludgeon. Many years ago, there was a book published called The Bell Curve, which was about intelligence. And it was this huge fat book that, if you were to boil it down really, grossly oversimplify it, they basically said intelligence has a huge biological component that's inherited, and there's nothing you can do about it. And some people are just inherently lower, and some people are inherently higher, and there's not much you can do about it. That's controversial in and of itself. But then they also said, and a lot of racial and ethnic differences are tied into this, and that set off all the alarms everywhere. Now, the trick is they had these giant tables of numbers in the books, and it lent an air of objectivity to their argument. Their argument was not objective. They were being very selective about how they did things, and they were making a very controversial argument, but by putting numbers to it, it intimidated people, so that a lot of people felt that they're economists and they've got numbers and they've done an analysis, so it must be right. I think we can all recognize that. I hope that all of us who are here right now can recognize that as silly. Just because somebody has numbers doesn't make it right. You watch an Olympic competition that has scoring like ice skating or gymnastics. And yeah, they have numbers. Everybody holds up a thing and gives a score to a performance, that doesn't make it objective. They're all over the place. And we know that people can be biased in a lot of important ways. So the trick here is that when you do something with AI or you're working with your data, there's the assumption that I'm doing this analysis, I'm doing a regression, I'm doing a decision tree, I'm doing a neural network, and because I'm programming it, it is correct and it is free from biases. Now, if we've learned anything in the last several years, or rather, if we have been painfully reminded of anything in the past several years, is that there's a huge number of biases baked in to methods that they're here in the United States. We had the enormous controversies around systemic racism and systemic bias. These are things that people have known about for a very long time, but they've got brought back to our consciousness. And we have had a number of issues where people like to say, I'm using this objective method, and say, no, your method itself is inherently not objective. And the method by which it's conducted becomes a problem. I know I'm being pretty vague here, but my point is, when you bring out numbers, it doesn't mean that you've automatically solved the problem and nobody can argue with it. I have used numbers deliberately to silence people. I mean, I used a spreadsheet when we were going on a very long trip with my children to show who got to sit next to the window when we were in the airplane. And I used the spreadsheet to just try to shut down any arguments. So that was a kind of a heavy-handed use of spreadsheets, but hopefully we recognize that's an absurd situation, and hopefully we recognize that shouldn't be the case when you're doing things like whether a person gets a loan or whether they get promoted or a job or whether they get convicted of a crime. It's not a matter of going up to some kiosk and typing in the numbers and having it spit out an equation. It doesn't work. And part of the problem here is that these data-based methods and the idea that you can build this econometric model, those are all based on the assumption of rationality and also proportionality. These fall into the category of market pricing relationships. But that's only appropriate in certain situations. Like I said, I can put a price on my bicycle. I can't put a price on my kid, nor can I put a strict dollar value on how much each of my academic publications is worth. I can try, but it's going to be really iffy. Trying to quantify some things can be seen as a violation of the relationship in and of itself. And relational boundaries are very, very important to people. You know, for instance, that one of the controversies that comes up with Gen AI is about authorship and authenticity. So, you know, it's perfectly fine to use ChatGPT to write code for your own projects. However, if you're doing professional work or if you're consulting, it's a very big issue. I'm happy to use Gen AI, use ChatGPT to help me solve problems, things that I'm trying to work into my own code. But if I were hired by a client, I would not want to sit around and do this and have it type it all out. You know, even a pretty straightforward thing. When I work with data, I generally work in R. It's because I come from the social sciences. I am able to do things in Python, but I am not nearly as well versed in Python as I am in R. And there are times I thought, well, I should just take all the code I've written in R, stick it into ChatGPT, and have it, you know, chug out a Python version of it. And the trick is that might work. On the other hand, I imagine everybody here has tried having ChatGPT write code for them. And while it often works, and sometimes it can do really remarkable things, there are times that it just crashes and burns. Also, there's times it does things in a really weird way. Each programming language has its own standards, has its own conventions. You know, there is, you might say, fluent R code, just as there is fluent Python code. And I'm afraid that I would get something that sounded really weird in Python. The same way that, if you use Google Translate to go from one language to another, I speak passable French, and I can tell if it translates something into French. I have an idea whether it is uh, correct or not. On the other hand, if I have it translated into Farsi, I have no idea. And I'm afraid it could be saying something ridiculous. I know that sometimes happens when you turn on auto captions on a video. And so it becomes risky. And but there's also the thing about voice. When you do your work, some of the work needs to be from a person. It needs to be from you. A couple of months ago, I made a tiny little video that I stuck on LinkedIn to just say, hey, guess what? I'm still a human and I still do my own stuff. I have never used AI to do anything on LinkedIn. I did use AI the other day. I had a student who wanted some feedback on their resume, and I was in a time crunch. And so I had ChatGPT give me some feedback. That it said, I took the feedback and I rewrote basically everything. But normally I wouldn't do that. I feel that having my own personal voice and having that personal touch is too important. It gets into issues of, well, I was reading something recently about ghostwriting. So somebody wants to write a book, usually a memoir. They want to write their own autobiography. And it's a very common practice for people who are not writers, but want to write a memoir, to hire somebody who is a writer who actually writes the whole thing for them. It's been done a million times. And sometimes they'll give that person credit. This book is by so-and-so with so-and-so, which means I'm the person who spoke, but they're the writer who turned it all into a book. But more often than not, they don't. Ghostwriters just work for a fee. And so you get a book that's not written by the person. And in fact, there are times where it really is just a biography, or sometimes it's even a wishful thinking biography that the person kind of guessed what to put in there. And so you get this dramatically varying quality. And in that sense, it's not that different from the Chat GPT books that are in Amazon, or I read once that something like 20% of research articles in certain fields, are either plagiarized or written by AI, which is a huge problem, because you don't even know who wrote it or whether that person is human. You may be aware there was recently a technology conference that had to get canceled because the promoter was putting on fake profiles of several speakers who were women, but they weren't real. They were fake pictures, they were fake profiles, they were fake talks, and they ended up having to cancel the conference entirely because of it. But ghostwriting is one thing, and a lot of times you kind of go, yeah, okay, that's a little bit like using ChatGPT to help you write your code. That's fine. ChatGPT is your code ghostwriter. Fine. That's different from plagiarism, where you just steal somebody else's material. And see, that is a violation of the boundary. Ghostwriting is sort of like bringing somebody else into your communal sharing relationship. This is me, well, me and somebody else. But plagiarism is faking the relationship. I stole this and I just uploaded it completely, and I didn't write it at all, or I put a new thing on. I make all these videos for LinkedIn, and they get stolen all the time. And that, it's frustrating because I get paid when people view the videos on LinkedIn most of the time, unless it's part of a promotion. What's funny about that is I also make videos for my company, datalab.cc. I share those videos for free. And occasionally I share them with other organizations. One is Free Code Camp on YouTube. They asked me, I gave them all of my videos. I gave them the raw files. I gave them everything for free so they could publish it on their site. The nice thing is they say it's from me, but they put it on their site, and they've gotten millions of views for my videos. but I'm totally happy to share that with them because it maintains the integrity of the relationship. However, when somebody takes my LinkedIn course and they remove, the introduction and they put something else on there, um, it's a violation of the boundaries of the relationship. And that's something that Gen AI makes very, very simple. It makes it very easy to impersonate somebody else or to effectively plagiarize them. Um, Now, again, if you're writing articles for a newspaper, that's going to be a problem. If you're writing a memoir, that's going to be a really big problem, um, because people want to know who they're dealing with. And violations of these communal sharing boundaries, you're in the group or you're out of the group, but violations of that are seen as massive. It's not the same, it's one thing to violate a market pricing relationship. That's for instance, you're not paying somebody enough, or you're giving more to one person than they deserve. That's an issue, but it doesn't bring up nearly the same level of emotional reaction that a violation of communal sharing boundaries brings up. That's where somebody's seen as impersonating or actually cultural appropriation falls into the category of the violation of communal sharing boundaries. So our time is nearly up, but I want to say that when it comes to working with Gen AI, totally fine to use it to help you. Think of it as your own ghostwriter, but you have your own voice and try to maintain your own voice to write things in a way that if it's going to go to other people and needs to be understood, um, the trick is that Gen AI makes ghostwriting, makes plagiarism very easy, and it violates all these kinds of relationships. Also, the idea that if you're doing data work and you've got data, and if you've got code that is somehow is magically authentic, well, that's wishful thinking. There are so many ways to violate assumptions that it's important to be mindful, not just of the legal aspects, because you can get sued for violations, not just the legal aspects, but also the social and the interpersonal aspects. When you work with people, there are relational aspects that you want to honor and to maintain as you go through that. And absolutely use the AI. It's going to make your work a lot easier, but make sure that you're doing it in a way that maintains the integrity of the relationships you have both with your employers, with your clients, and with the people that you're serving. Anyhow, that's what I've got for today. And hopefully you've gotten something useful there. And this video will be available, a recorded version of it will be available on LinkedIn and YouTube and Facebook almost as soon as we're done. And I would love to continue the conversation. So in the next month or so, I'm going to write a newsletter. I have a LinkedIn newsletter called Data is for Doing that I will build on these same ideas. I'll give it references. I'll give some more examples, things that's a little more concrete that you can share with others. And I invite you to subscribe to that newsletter just so you can see when it comes out and you can follow up with it. But also, I invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn and continue the conversation right there. And with that, thank you so much for joining me today. And I look forward to seeing you again in the future. Bye-bye.